Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Tavares, and I am so excited to welcome you all tonight to our virtual Miami at the Merc enrichment event. Tonight's panel is just really exciting for me and for my family. It's so impressive that Miami has produced such an acclaimed group of authors for kids and teens. But as I was telling them beforehand, the fact that they have spent most of their professional lives here in Ohio, and that they're all women Miamians, and we get to feature them tonight during Women's History Month is very exciting. So I'm so glad that you're all joining us tonight. We have hundreds of Miami alumni and friends watching, and we have representation from the classes of 1957 to 2023. And we probably have even beyond that because my 13-year-old came in to say hello at the beginning too, and he's watching now because he's very interested in all of these authors. So I think we have quite the range tonight of Miamians who are participating with us. So thank you so much to those of you who submitted the questions ahead of time. We also welcome you to participate live. You can ask questions or share comments using the Ask a Question button below the video, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I do have just a few quick acknowledgements and we'll get to the panel. Thank you to, of course, our moderator and our panelists for sharing their valuable time with us tonight. Thank you to the Miami University Alumni Association for hosting tonight's event. And finally, thank you to Walter Frank and the Mickey and Walter Frank Family Charitable Fund for providing the vision and financial support for Miami at the Merc. Miami at the Merc is a professional enrichment and networking series hosted at the Mercantile Library in Cincinnati, but now we get to offer it to all Miamians virtually. So I am thrilled to introduce our moderator for this evening. Dr. Madelyn Detloff is Professor and Chair of English and Professor of Global and Intercultural Studies at Miami University. Her books include The Value of Wolf and The Persistence of Modernism, Loss and Mourning in the 20th Century. She is co-editor of Queer Bloomsbury and Virginia Woolf, Art, Education, and Internationalism. She teaches courses on feminist and queer theory, crip theory, modernism, gender and sexuality studies, and interdisciplinary inquiry and communication. Madelyn, I am going to turn this panel of fabulous women over to you and take it away. I will see you later.
Thanks, Kim, and welcome everyone. Welcome to our esteemed panelists, and welcome to the over 260 audience members out there. It's terrific to see you all and to know that you're here. I have the great pleasure to introduce to you our panelists. I want to let you know that they are so esteemed that if I were to list all of their accomplishments, then we would be here all night and you'd be listening to me. So I'm going to just give you the highlights, but you can always read their bios on the information page for today. And also you can look them up on their websites. So the first person I'd like to introduce is Tamara Bundy. Tammy Bundy received her Master's of Arts in Teaching from Miami University. I believe it was through the Ohio Writing Project, which is near and dear to my heart. She's a former columnist with the Cincinnati Post, as well as EWTN Global Catholic Radio. And she currently teaches English at Miami University, mostly on our regional campuses. So we're proud of you threefold. Bundy is the author or co-author of 7 nonfiction books. Her debut middle grade novel, Walking with Miss Millie, won several awards, including the Ohioana Award for Middle Grade Young Adult Fiction. Her second middle grade novel, Pixie Pushes On, thank you. And her debut picture book, Lullaby Prayer, were just released last year. So, and there we have it. Thank you. Welcome, Tammy. It's great to have you back. Our next author is Sharon Draper. Sharon Draper is an honored educator and a best-selling author. She earned her M.A. from Miami University and is surely one of Miami's most acclaimed literary alumni. And there's a lot of very high praise in that, given that we have Rita Dove and lots of other authors, including the rest of you. With more than 30 award-winning books, Sharon has been honored at the White House 6 times, was the recipient of the Margaret A. Edwards Award for Lifetime Literary Achievement, and is a 5-time Coretta Scott King Award winner. Sharon was named National Teacher of the Year in 1997, an incredibly high honor as well. And she has been selected as Ohio's Outstanding High School Language Arts Educator, Ohio Teacher of the Year, and is an NCNW Excellence in Teaching Award winner. And she has a long list of accomplishments, more than I could tell you today. But for the sake of time, you might want to look at her website, SharonDraper.com, for a more complete list of all her accolades. Welcome, Sharon. Our next speaker is Margaret Peterson Haddix. Margaret earned her BA from Miami University. She grew up on a farm near Washington Courthouse. She worked as a newspaper reporter in Indianapolis before her first book was published in 1995. She has since written more than 40 books for kids and teens, including the Greystone Secrets series and the Shadow Children series, the Missing series, and the 10th book in the 39 Clues series. Her books have been honored with New York Times bestseller status, the International Reading Association's Children's Book Award, the American Library Association Best Book, and Quick Pick for Reluctant Young Adult Readers notations. She's received numerous State Readers' Choice Awards, and her books have also been translated into more than 20 languages. So welcome, Margaret. It's great to see you. And last but not least, Margaret Rogerson. Margaret Rogerson is the author of the New York Times bestsellers An Enchantment of Ravens and Sorcery of Thorns. She has a bachelor's degree in cultural anthropology from Miami University. And when she's not reading or writing, she enjoys sketching, gaming, making pudding, and watching more documentaries than is socially acceptable, according to some. Although during this pandemic, I think it's quite acceptable. And welcome, Margaret. Welcome. Welcome to all of you. We're really pleased to see you all here. And the way we're going to work this is I'm going to ask a few general questions. And then we received over 40 questions previous to coming here from you in the audience who sent in questions previously. So I'll try to group those into little groups. And then feel free to enter a question into the link for entering a question, and I will try to get to as many questions as I can while we're doing this. Thank you very much. So the first question is about your alma mater. I'd like to know, what role did Miami University play in your lives and subsequent path to becoming a successful author for kids and teens? And we'll start with Margaret Haddix.
Thank you. I appreciate the way Dr. Detloff is running this, that we kind of are in order and you get a different person starting each time, because I've been on so many panels where we're all going, okay, who's going to go first? So that's really great. I would say that going to Miami was what moved the idea of becoming an author from something that I just kind of viewed as a pleasant daydream or a little bit of a fantasy, but something that would never really happen, to something that was actually possible. I had some very encouraging professors that made a huge difference. Just the thought that many of them were published themselves. So that kind of was like, oh, wait a minute, these are people who have made this happen, and they are professional writers and they know what they're doing, and I need to listen to them. So that was very helpful. I would say that my senior year, I actually wrote a novel as my senior honors project, and doing that under the guidance of Professor Stephen Bauer. That made a huge difference. That was not my first book, which is a great thing because it was pretty awful. But that gave me confidence a few years later when I did write what became my first published book. So that was a great background for me.
Go ahead and go ahead.
Should I go?
Margaret.
Okay.
Yeah.
My thing was still over on the side, so I wasn't sure. Yeah. So I didn't major in English or creative writing. I majored in anthropology. So it wasn't sort of a direct correlation for me, but I do feel that my time at Miami did really inform me as a writer. for me, writing, what's most important to me is character. That's the aspect of writing that I'm most interested in. And I think a degree in anthropology did help me sort of see people differently. I mean, it is the study of humanity. So I think without that degree, I'm not sure if I would have actually gone on to write or become published in that sense. Also, as anyone who's taken anthropology knows, it's a lot of essay writing. So I do think that the endless essays did improve my writing skills a bit.
Awesome. For me, I went to The Ohio State University, that school up north, for my undergrad degree. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, so I was majoring in English first, but I got nervous about, where people kept saying, are you going to go to New York? That was before this thing we call the internet, and I thought, oh, maybe I need a backup plan. So I loved kids. I loved English. So it just made sense that I became an English teacher. So during that time of being an English teacher, I got married and had 4 kids, and it was while I was home, I started writing a column for a paper first up in Columbus where I lived, and then eventually here in Cincinnati. And through that, I got some nonfiction books published. But when I decided to go back to teaching, I needed to renew my certificate. And that's when I decided to look into the Ohio Writing Project through Miami. And I credit the OWP course for just reigniting my passion for writing, for letting me know that I think I had kind of put myself into one little category of I was going to be a nonfiction writer. And it was through OWP that I realized that I could write other things too. So I really, really credit that. It's an amazing program for helping teachers teach writing, but also for igniting that passion inside of so many of us teachers to become writers too. So I give so much credit to the Ohio Writing Project through Miami.
I didn't know I was going to be a writer. I majored in English. I did my undergraduate in California, but I was born in Ohio. So when I got married, we moved to Cincinnati, and I said, I've got to get my master's. So because that's where my husband had done his undergraduate. So the thing I remember most about Miami was I had the excellent teachers that I had who taught me to think about the words and the language and putting it all together. I remember sitting in those study carrels for hours and hours and hours, which was a really good relief because I had kids at home. And so I learned so much from that experience. I remember sitting for my master's in front of the committee, and they're asking me questions, and I nailed them all. It was just such a positive time for me. It was just thrilling, and it helped me become the writer that I was going to become. I didn't write a book for 20 years after that. I had 4 kids. I was kind of busy. But Miami gave me the core that I needed to do what I was later going to do, that I didn't even know I was going to do. Thank you all so much. I was tearing up a little bit thinking about the professors who came before me, who I admire so much too. So thank you for that. Moving on to the next question. A lot of people had similar versions of this question in the pre-submitted questions, and that is, can you describe your path to becoming a successful author? And what are some of the highlights of your journey along that path? And we'll start out with Margaret Rogerson for this one and go through again.
All right. So I've always wanted to be an author. It was my dream career ever since childhood, but I never really felt like it was quite possible as a career, I think because I had never actually met someone who had published a book that I knew of. But I remember after graduating from college, I had a couple of years where I found myself, sort of trying to figure out what to do in life, and I had free time. So I thought I might as well try this. It's been my dream ever since I was a kid. And there's a temptation to not try something like that because you're so afraid that you'll fail. And I think a lot of authors are perfectionists, so failing is really scary for us. But I remember on April Fool's Day, 2014, I just decided that I was going to write a book and finish it. I had to finish it. That was my sort of my goal, my resolve, because prior to that, I had casually started writing books, but I had never actually finished one before. So I wrote a really, really bad book. It took me 2 years and it was terrible. It was so bad, but I queried that to literary agents and I got rejected. I got so many rejections. No one even wanted to look at it because it was an awful book and my query letter was so bad. But then I wrote a second book because that's what you have to do. You just have to keep trying. And my second book received more interest from agents. And I actually ended up entering a partnership with a literary agent who had rejected my first book. So I thought that was really neat that we got to reconnect in that way. And yeah, I think that's probably...
That's great. Yeah, for me, as I mentioned, I'd written a column for, at the time I was writing, when I moved to Cincinnati, for the Cincinnati Post, and those kind of lent themselves to the nonfiction books that I wrote. I didn't need an agent for those. And then, as I mentioned, I started going back to OWP and I started teaching high school. And I will tell you that every year, one of my students' favorite books was this book called Tears of a Tiger by this lady named Sharon Draper. And every year I would teach this book, I would then tell the students the story that Mrs. Draper will probably share with you soon about her transition from English teacher to this middle grade high school YA novelist. And I would tell them every year, you're going to see me there too. I'm going to see there. So such an inspiration to me. And then I did decide to start writing, and of like so many of us, the first drafts, didn't amount to what I thought they would amount to. Finally got a really nice rejection. You're a writer when you qualify your rejections. And I got a nice rejection from an agent who said, I love your writing, but your voice tends to be better for middle grade. I think it's too sweet for YA. And that I was teaching high school at the time, so that was a whole new ball game for me. And as soon as I started reading more middle grade, I fell in love with the genre. I fell in love with the age, and it just opened up so many more possibilities for me. And then I did eventually write what would be my first middle grade novel and get an agent, and then eventually get the book deal too. But I credit that lady named Sharon Draper for inspiring me so much.
That's amazing. It touches me. I was a reader before I was a writer. It was a little girl. We had 3 stations on TV. You young people don't understand. We had 3 stations. There was 5, 9, and 12. That was it. And I wasn't allowed to watch a lot of television, but the library was right down the street from my house. So I would check out 10 books every single week. The librarians knew me. I read every single book on the elementary side of the library, and then they stuck me into the adult side and let me get those. I was a reader. I was a passionate reader, so I had words and words and words in my head. I've had young people say, I'm going to write a book. I said, great. How many books have you read? Well, I've never really read one, but I'm going to write a book. You've got to read 1 million books if you're going to write a book. But I did not know I was going to be a writer. That was not my goal. I was a teacher. I loved teaching. I was really good at it. I could look at somebody's piece of writing and say, fix this, change this, and your writing will be good. And they go, how do you know how to do that? I said, I don't know. I just do. So one day I had a kid who said, well, why don't you write something? And I did. And he gave me this application for a contest. And I entered it just to show him up, and I won first prize. And I was like, well, gee, I'm a writer. I can write. And so from there, I started working on novels. And I had people tell me, nobody's going to publish that. Nobody's going to read that. My very first novel I sent to 25 publishing companies, because that was back in the day when you just typed it on your typewriter and mailed it in. I'm old. Yes, typed, mailed. There was no email. And
I sent it to 25 publishers. I got 24 rejections and 1 yes. It was the very last letter, and it was Simon & Schuster. Wow. And that started it. So that was Tears of a Tiger that you were talking about. Was the very first one. So to anybody who's looking at this, be a reader if you want to be a writer. Be a reader if you don't want to be a writer.
That's great advice. And I would say that my journey started with being a reader as well. I maybe made myself sound a little bit too certain about being a writer, because the entire time I was at Miami, I knew I wanted to write, but I didn't know what kind of thing I wanted to write. And I kind of bounced back and forth. I think at the time, Miami had 7 different English majors that you could specialize in. And at one time or another, I had officially declared 5 of them as my major. I never said that linguistics was my major, but I think I just didn't know what it was, or I probably would have loved it as well. But kind of the main pull was between, I ended up majoring in both English/creative writing and English/journalism. And then I also majored in history because I just thought it was a bunch of stories and I loved it. But after graduation, I thought, I think I can get a job as a newspaper reporter or working at a newspaper somehow. And I don't know that I'm going to have success right away writing books. So I'll do this and then I'll kind of write fiction on the side. And it was something, it wasn't really a strategy, but it ended up being a very good strategy, because writing every day, which is what I had to do as a newspaper reporter, is a really good thing for improving your writing. So I was constantly writing. I was also going out and interviewing people constantly. Lots of people who had very different life experiences than I did. People who, people always ask, did you interview celebrities? And yes, I did. But I also interviewed people who would start out the interview saying, yeah, I don't even know why you're talking to me. There is nothing interesting about me. I am really, I'm not a very important person. And then you would hear their story, and they had an amazing story. And it would be, I would feel like it is my honor to be able to let other people know what you have done in your life, because you're incredible and people need to know. And so doing that for a couple years was wonderful practice. And I was writing fiction on the side. And then my husband, by that point I was married, my husband got a job in a small town in Illinois where he was the newspaper editor. And my only way of continuing as a newspaper reporter in that town would be to have him as my boss, which he was fine with, but I just didn't think it was the greatest idea. So we kind of agreed, this is my opportunity to focus on writing. Like I've said, that's what I want to do. I also taught part-time at a community college that was there. And I pretty much had the attitude that anytime he was at work, I was at work, and I was either teaching or I was writing. And that's when I wrote what became my first published book, Running Out of Time. And I actually wrote my first 2 published books before either of them got published. So I think a huge part of the story was also that rejection that most writers have to go through. And I think that was very important for me, because it kind of cemented for me that this is something that is important enough for me to keep trying. That at certain points when I'd get yet another rejection letter, my husband would say, are you sure? Are you sure this is something that's making you happy? Because you don't seem happy. And I'd be like, but this is what I want to do. Yes, I have to keep doing this. So it made it that much sweeter when I finally did sell my first book.
That's terrific. That is such terrific advice. I was just thinking that Beatrix Potter's first book that she shipped around was rejected roundly by dozens and dozens and dozens of publishers. And then she did all right. Peter Rabbit did all right, and so on. So, it's really important to be persistent, and I love hearing your stories of that as well. I do think, Margaret, did being a community college instructor influence the title of your first novel, Running Out of Time, at all?
You would think it actually very directly influenced my second book, which is Don't Dare Read This, Mrs. Dunfrey.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
because it's what a kid is saying to the teacher.
Wow, that's lovely. Thank you so much. The next question, you've answered some of it already, so feel free to go in different directions with this. But do you have any advice for aspiring authors of books, specifically books for kids and teens? And we'll start with Tammy.
Yeah, I think, Sharon so wisely pointed out, you have to read. You have to read, and then write. It's so simple that it seems silly to even have to repeat it. But I think I have a lot of people, often come up to me and say, I want to write for kids. How do I do that? And I say, well, what do you want to write? I don't know. I just like the whole thing. And I think that people have to understand that there is a huge difference in picture books, in the different types of picture books. There's a huge difference in some of the early readers. There's this difference in the lower middle grade and the upper middle grade. There's a difference in the lower YA and the upper YA. So I always say, well, go read everything you can and see what speaks to you the most. What is calling you? What really ignites you and excites you? And then you can start practicing that particular genre. So it is so important to know what you want to. Now, having said that, you don't want to get pegged into one thing or another. You want to be open, because I always thought that I was just going to write nonfiction. So I'm really grateful that I eventually, got into fiction as well. And I think, like Margaret was saying, I think my ability to write a column in such a short, simple, time frame and space helped me in my chapters. It also helped me in my picture book coming up too. So I think that it's very important to know what you want to write, and also motivation. I think that so many people are like, am I going to make a lot of money, and are we going to be famous? Are we going to? And if that's why you're doing it, then I think you're just going to face one frustration after another. If you write because your heart is happy when you're writing, you're going to be a success.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Young people ask me all the time, what do I have to do? How do I have to? I said, if you want to be a writer, you have to write, and you have to observe. You have to look at things. I made, back in the good old days when we could go into schools and we could actually touch each other and look outside the window. Look at that red car outside the window. Describe it. Who drives it? What's underneath it? Who had it last week? What's in the trunk? To make them think. If you're going to write, you have to have, first of all, you don't write for money. You write because it is something inside of you, and you have to write. And you need to write a story that somebody else needs to read. I told you about how when I was a little girl, I read everything at my library, all of them, every single thing. The librarian knew my dog by name. But there were maybe 6 books out of those hundreds of books that had characters that looked like me. When I was really young, I didn't notice. As I got older, it's like, there are no books for kids who look like me, unless they were negative or stereotypes or made jokes of, or made to demean the character. And so I think that formulated my writing early on, is I want to write books for kids who look like me, so that kids who look like me, as well as kids who don't look like me, because I write for everybody. But for those kids who say, I have never seen myself in a book, that's who the next generation of writers has to write for. Those kids who have never seen themselves in literature. It's so important when you recognize who you are and you get affirmation through other characters. So my biggest advice is to write what is true for you and write what is real and write about real human being, not just the generic stereotype that we think people expect.
Wow, Sharon is always a hard person to follow. but I think that answer was even harder to follow than usual. I mean, for me to follow, we all followed what she was saying. But yes, that is all very true. And what Tamara said as well, all very true. I would add, they covered things that I often say when people ask me for advice. And I'm going to go with something that makes me sound like I'm about 1,000 years old. I think that it is really important for people to have time to think if you want to become a writer. And I am worried, this is where I'm going to sound 1,000 years old. I'm going to go into that. Kids nowadays, always on their cell phones, always playing video games. And it's actually not kids. Adults are every bit as bad about every single minute that we have, pretty much. Unless we make a conscious effort not to, we are filling with things to entertain ourselves. That, I mean, I'm not going to the grocery as much as I used to, but, you know, standing there in the checkout line, it became my habit that I'd pull my cell phone out and I'd check my email, or I'd check Twitter, or I'd check Facebook. And I remember, you know, I'm old enough that I remember pre-cell phone days when I was standing there in the checkout line, I would be kind of letting my mind wander, or I would be, you know, kind of looking around, seeing the people around me, paying attention to what people were doing, thinking about, oh, hey, that outfit that girl's wearing, that's kind of cool, or, you know, paying attention and being present in the moment and thinking. And I think we are so used to taking other people's thoughts into our heads that sometimes we don't even know what's in our own heads. And we don't always recognize what somebody else is feeding us and what we ourselves think. And good writing, good thinking is good writing. And you have to be able to have those thought processes that work well to be able to get it down on paper. And it's, you know, the more you write, the better you become at writing. The more you think, the better you become at thinking. So I'm just an advocate for having time. And I'm not, you know, I'm not saying throw your cell phone away. I'm not saying never watch TV. I watch Netflix too. But, you know, just make sure that in the course of your life, you have time to become comfortable in your own head.
It's really hard to go last for this question. Those were also good. And one thing, building on what Margaret was saying, I'm finding it very interesting during the pandemic that we're not going out and seeing people and observing people the way that we normally do as writers. I've found that has dramatically impacted my writing and my creativity, is that lack of ability to just go out and observe. So that is so important. I guess everyone has already really covered a lot of the important stuff, but I think for me, the best advice I was given as an aspiring author was that it's okay to fail, that failing will happen, and that it is a necessary and important part of the process of writing. Failing always teaches you something. Every book that doesn't get published, that gets put in a drawer, will teach you something and will improve your work. I heard someone say once that the best authors, or those who end up getting published, aren't necessarily those who write the best books, but are those who don't give up. And I also think that's true. I know some authors who have written 7, 8 manuscripts, or have been trying to write books for decades before their first book gets published, and some of them have gone on to be enormously successful. And I always found that really inspiring.
That's terrific advice from all of you. And I love the idea that we need to be free to fail in order to succeed. I think that's really important. And also extremely important to write for the people who need to read us as well. right? Who we have to write the books that need to be read by people who need to read them. And that brings me to my last sort of general question before we get to questions from the audience. And that is, why is it important for young people today, right now, 2021, right where we're at, where we're sitting, this moment in time, to have access to the joys and the challenges and the insights provided by reading the kinds of books and the kinds of materials that you write? And Sharon will go first.
I think it's imperative that they have access to books, especially because of the pandemic. They were shut down, shut out. Young people for months had no access to teachers, to libraries, to schools, to interactions. So every time I get the opportunity, I tell them, find a book, read a book, order a book. I don't care what book, but find something to stimulate your mind. Because if we're going to create the next generation of writers, we have to create a generation of readers. I also have given everybody that I've talked to in these little boxes in the past couple of months, I've given them an assignment, and I'm going to offer this now. I want each of you who's listening to this, I want you to write a memoir of 2020. This has not happened since 1918, and I'm old, but I wasn't there then. And, we should all write down what it was like to not be able to go out, to be afraid to go to the store, to worry about, oh my goodness, I can't find a mask anywhere on sale, to stay in the house with people that you love for months and months and months until you don't love them anymore. For all of the things that we went to, what we lost, what we missed, the people we lost, the lives we lost, the connections that we lost, the human touch that we lost. I want each of you to write that down and write in a memoir so that your children and your grandchildren can say, oh, you lived through 2020? Is this what it was like? Because we will forget, and we'll go back to routines and we will forget. So that is my assignment to the 4 authors here, and to everybody who's listening. I want you to write a memoir of 2020 for the next generation. It is vital and essential that we never forget.
I think I'm next, and I just want to admire what a great teacher Sharon is, because she's giving us homework. I mean, that's perfect. That is just great. She's like, this is what you need to do. So that's wonderful. But I will springboard for what she said. And books and reading are important in part because stories are really important. And the stories we tell ourselves about our lives shape what we do. They shape how we view each other. They shape how we treat each other. I'm thinking of the example that Sharon gave of not, as a child, seeing herself in or people like her in books very much, or seeing really crude, awful stereotypes that were inappropriate. And if that's the only story we offer children, is stories that make them feel inadequate or feel less than, that we have to do better. We have to do better than that for children. And we need to give them hope and encouragement and optimism, and stories are a way to do that. And we also need to give people empathy for others who are not who don't have the same experiences. So those are all things that are very important in books. And I know that movies and TV shows can provide that as well, but I like the way that in books, you have to use your own imagination, and you are not seeing another person up there on the screen going through those experiences. If you are reading a story and putting yourself in that character's place, you feel like it is happening to you. And that's empathy. That's how you develop empathy.
Oh, I think I'm next. It's very hard following up Margaret with these questions. I feel that, I don't know if I should say this on an alumni panel, but I feel like the best education a person can get is through reading. I think you have many teachers in high school and in college, but every book that you read is in a sense another teacher. And so you can get thousands of teachers and in a lifetime just from reading. And you can read from the perspective of people that you may never meet in your lifetime. I don't feel that I have a whole lot to add, but yeah, I do feel strongly that reading is the best thing a person can do for their minds and for their conscience.
Yeah, yes to what everyone has said. And I think it's that old saying of a book is a mirror and a window. And I think that we've talked about that, the importance of it being a mirror for so many people. But especially in these times, you're right, it's just to have that window to look out. I think that books do, like you say, teach us empathy. One of the most emotional questions I ever got was at the end of last school year. The pandemic had shut down all the schools, everything was Zoomed, and I was talking about my latest middle grade that happened to be about polio epidemic. And so we hadn't planned how pertinent that would be with the timing of the polio epidemic and how scared my main character was with the pandemic. And at the end, the teacher said, do you have any questions or comments? And this one little boy raised his hand, and here's this little 5th grade boy who his comment to me was, my mom is a nurse and she's been on maternity leave and she's getting ready to go back to work and I'm scared. And I just thought, what a beautiful thing that book, allowed him to be vulnerable, allowed him to share that. And I just think books do that. They invite you into feelings that you may not even know you had. Boys, girls, I just love the fact that books open us up and help us feel what someone else is feeling, and maybe even what we're feeling too that we didn't know we were feeling.
That's terrific. Thank you all. That was really moving. I think we need each other now. We're in a time we have for a long time, but we really know we need each other exactly. And so it's good to acknowledge that and to hear that and to participate in being people who can be there for each other. We have a lot of questions that came in before the show, but I also have some questions that just came up in chat. And so I'm going to start with those. And this is where you just jump in if you don't mind. We won't have a prescribed order. If you have an answer, and then I have a couple questions that are for specific authors, and I'll let you know. But the first one seems really pertinent, especially to thinking about difficulties, right? And the question is, how do you balance writing realistic stories with writing satisfying stories? I know when people read, they expect an ending to a book where everything gets resolved, but that's not always realistic. Life isn't always that clear cut. Do you have any thoughts on that? Anyone jump in?
I think a lot of it can depend on genre, right? Like when readers pick up a romance book, they expect it to have a happy ending, like a happily ever after. And that's what they get out of a romance. So yeah, that's always interested me. I'm not a big romance reader, but I've always really loved that as a genre, it has such a sense of itself, like it has such a strong identity. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm a writer of fantasy, so I don't know if I'm necessarily the best person to answer a question about realistic endings. But I do think it's interesting that depending on the type of book that you read, readers may be expecting something completely different out of it and how it will make them feel at the end.
Terrific. Others?
Go ahead, Sharon.
No. I was just going to ask a question about. I'm just seeing the questions in the chat. I was wondering how we were going to answer those because
I'm gonna say them. I'm gonna read them. So you don't have to read the chat, although I think
I was trying to do both sides.
Yeah, no. It's easier I've run not quite a million, but almost meetings like this, and it's easier to have one person designated for the chat, I think. I do think that I'm going to nuance this question a little bit. You know, not all children's stories or stories for young people are happy, right? Kids have rough lives, and so maybe I can say, how do you deal with disappointment or difficulty in your stories?
I think for me, that's one of the hardest things. You fall in love with your characters, and to let them fall hard so that you can raise the arc back up and have resolution. That's the hardest thing for me, because I get really attached to them and I don't want them to face these difficulties. But like you were saying, for people to see broken families, disease, and problems, they need to see the character going through that and finding resolution. Because I write middle grade, they do end relatively well. Not always happy ever after for everyone, but they do usually have a nice resolution. But that is hard. But people need to see reality. I mean, if you're writing something that you want someone to get something out of, for me, I have to sometimes go where it's hard to go when you love a character.
One of the things that has helped me is talking to people who are in those circumstances that I'm writing about. And I'll give an example. I have a book that came out several years ago called Because of Anya, which is about a girl who has a disease called alopecia areata. And it's a disease that makes your hair fall out. It's not something that's painful, but because we all care a lot about what we look like, it is a very difficult disease for especially females to deal with. And I had interviewed a girl who was in 8th grade who, starting in 6th grade, developed that problem. And when I interviewed her, I was kind of thinking at the end of the book, like the girl in my story would come to deal with her situation and be like, okay, yeah, well, obviously I had this problem, but I can move on. It'll all be okay. But talking to the girl, one of the questions that I asked her was, at what point did you kind of feel like you were okay with this? And her answer to me was, well, I hope I get there someday, but I'm not there yet. And that totally changed how I was thinking about the book that I was writing, because I thought, if I write kind of the Hollywood ending, okay, everything's fine now, at the end, let's skip off merrily into the sunset, that's doing a terrible disservice to people who have that problem. And I think some of them might think, well, what's wrong with me that I can't skip off into the sunset so easily? So because of talking to that girl and because of hearing what she had really gone through, I changed the ending dramatically, that there is still hope. There is a lot of optimism at the end of the book, but everything's not okay. It's not, like the package with the bow on the top, everything's fine. It's, things are going to get better. We're on a good path now. And I think that's what we have to offer kids. We have to offer them a path to get toward better things, not tell them lies that everything easily just resolves itself.
That's really lovely. Thank you. I want to move on. The next question will be for Sharon Draper, and it is, my wife is an elementary school special education resource teacher and loves Out of My Mind. To what degree do you feel you can write a novel which will teach young children life lessons they may not otherwise learn because it came from their parents or teachers who aren't as educated as maybe somebody who's done research on this?
I feel very strongly that no book that I write should aim to teach you anything. I don't aim to teach. There's no moral. That was in Sunday school. They did that, and I was, required to learn this and apply it to my life. I create a character. I give the character problems, Sometimes the problems get resolved, sometimes the problems do not, but it's not required to have a happy ending. It's not required to resolve all the problems. You make a situation, you have a character that has to deal with this situation in a realistic way, and then you let the reader draw their own conclusions. Kids ask me all the time, what did you want us to learn from that book? And I said, well, what did you learn? Well, I learned this and this and this. I said, good, that's what I meant. That's what I intended. Whatever you get out of the book is what I intended. I don't have any preconceived notions. And different people interpret fiction in different ways. So one kid said, well, I learned never to do that. I said, good. Well, I learned that I need to, get a closer relationship with my father. Two different purposes, same book, same story, because books are individual and we all have individual responses. So I never plan what you ought to think about the book. I hope you think something, hope you like it, but I don't care what it is.
That's really lovely. Thank you. I'm going to keep going on because we have a lot of questions. The next one is for Margaret Haddix. What was your inspiration for writing the 10th 39 Clues book? What kind of research did you do before writing this particular book?
Well, that particular series is a series that was created by Scholastic, the publisher, and they invited authors to take part in it. And Rick Riordan, who is very famous, wrote the very first book, setting off this clue hunt where the characters are going around the world competing with some very nasty relatives to find things. And he also kind of wrote a tiny synopsis for the first, the next 9 books. I wrote the 10th book. And so I was told from the beginning that I had to have some connection to Shakespeare, and that the action had to take place in either England and or Ireland. And I also had to reveal what the end of the clue hunt was and what the prize was and what the final clue was. And so one of the things that I did, and this, you're really going to feel like it's hardship and suffering. I went to England and I went to all the Shakespeare sites. I went to the, the reproduction of the Globe Theatre. I went to Stratford upon Avon. I took my husband and kids with me, and my kids were about the right age. So I was constantly saying, so if you dressed up like a ninja, do you think you could, and he had a grappling hook, do you think you could end up on top of the Globe Theatre? How do you think that would work? And they were great with that at the Globe Theatre. By the time we went to the 5th Shakespeare House in Stratford upon Avon, I think they were a little done with it. But it was, being there gave so much inspiration. It was just wonderful to have that. And I put all these things in the book based on being there, including at one point, anytime I travel, I like to look at snack foods that are different in that particular location. And I put in all these British snacks. And then at the end, they had a fact checker from London checking that to make sure that like everything was accurate. And some of the snacks that I had found, they hadn't even heard of. And I was like, I've seen it. It's real. Really, it is there. So that was a huge part of the inspiration.
That sounds like so much fun. I think we didn't delve yet into research, but sometimes research can be, incredibly fun, depending on what you're researching. Yeah. Let me continue on. I have a question from a 6th grader named Lily that says, what would you have done if you had not become an author?
Well, I was a teacher, so I would have kept on teaching. I'm still a teacher. I've already given you homework. So.
Yeah, same thing, teacher. And we're going to be working on our Draper papers. That's we're working on that.
I have a question here that says, when is our homework due, Mrs. Draper?
Give it to your children. to the next generation.
Oh, okay. So that depends on how close we are to that stage right now.
Whoever you know that is younger than you are, you give it to that generation. Yeah. There you go.
That's lovely. Maybe you'll know when it's needed. How's that? You'll know when it's due because you'll feel that it's necessary. How's that? I don't know. Okay. I don't want to give anyone an extension. I'm known for that at Miami, but I won't do that. I have a couple other ones. And they're similar to the ones that we got in from our advanced questions. So I think we'll be okay. Someone says, I have a children's book coming out in 2 months called I Don't Want to Turn 3. How do I market it? And then I have another question that's kind of similar. Do you have any advice on the publishing process? Do you need to get an agent? And there were a lot of nuts and bolts questions from aspiring authors in the previously sent questions too. So as best you can, maybe we can just shout out your advice to our audience here.
Real quick about the agents. There's so much available online now. There's agents.com. I mean, I just made that up. But you just Google how to find a literary agent and boom, it'll come up. It's not like it used to be where you just kind of wandered in the dark and hoped you found a person. Their agencies are listed. The thing that I tell young people, this is more for young people than for adults. If you're an aspiring writer and you want to get published, what I tell anybody that's under college age, wherever you go, if they make you pay, run away. Because nobody should force you to pay to get you started. I'll get you on the internet. Just send me this. And these ads that come across and say, you want to be a writer? Send me money and I will get you published. So make sure that you're dealing with legitimate agencies, and there are places online that can guide you to those legitimate agencies. Just be aware of scams. That's the thing that I tell, especially young people and people starting out. There are a lot of scams, and there are people that says, if you enter this, we'll send you a copy of the book, and all you have to pay is $50 to get. No, beware of those kind of scams. There's lots of information available on the internet, legitimate information. Use that.
Can others talk about this? Are there any sort of magazines or journals also that you would recommend to writers who wish to get published, that it can help them along their journey?
Writer's Digest is amazing. It used to be published as a magazine, and everything I know that used to be published as a hard copy is available online. But be careful what you Google, and be careful how you Google, and be careful who you correspond with. Don't send your work out cold to somebody that you do not know.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I think that there are so many online communities now of writers, and find people who have the same type of fire in their bellies and the genre that you want to do, that they want to do. There's so many great writers communities out there because you do need some critique partners. You need some people who can walk this walk with you, so that by the time you get ready to query an agent, and yes, you really do need an agent if you want to get into the big houses and to have the publishing deals. But before you try to do that, it's great to have as many eyes on that manuscript to help you make it as good as you can make it. So definitely, I'm with Sharon. When we first started, we were mailing things out, but to have everything at our fingertips, literally at our fingertips online, it's such, there's so many things, but there are some not so great things out there too. So be cautious, but take advantage of all that out there too. And that goes for marketing as well. I know you asked about marketing. If you're going through a publisher, you probably are getting your marketing plan through them and a PR person. If it's a self-published book, then same thing. There are many things out there, some of which I would recommend avoiding, and some that are probably legitimate, but you really have to do your research.
And also for those looking to kind of break into particularly writing for children or teens, there's an organization called Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators that has chapters in most major cities. I know there's one in Columbus, there's one in Cincinnati, there's one in Northern Ohio. I think the Dayton one is kind of connected to either Cincinnati or Columbus. I'm not quite sure how it works, but they have monthly meetings, and it's an international organization, so there are conventions, all over. Particularly now, it's a very valuable thing because they make resources from every chapter kind of available to everybody who's involved. It is a fee membership type thing, but I know a lot of people who got their got into the business because of what they learned through SCBWI and the connections that they made toward SCBWI, that they met critique partners and that kind of thing. Excuse me.
I'm just going to add to that. For people who aren't familiar with it, we rattle it off because we know what it is, but the initials are SCBWI. Google those 5 initials, and they will guide you to legitimate sources. But that's a positive place that you can start with. SCBWI. We go, SCBWI.
And let me just say again, what a great teacher that I just rattled it off, but she is making sure that you guys get the information.
That is terrific. I have a couple more questions. I know we need to wrap up on time. But one of the questions from the pre-submitted questions was, how do you know when to send your drafts to friends or colleagues to critique? When is your draft ready to show to people when it's a work in progress?
That's kind of a gut thing, I think, because some drafts, I mean, the one thing I always tell students when I do school visits is that, that first draft you did, that's not your final draft. It's not even close to your final draft. I always, when I was teaching school, my students would complain about a revision. I would say, I'm working on my first manuscript that's, 200 pages long, and I've redone it 5 times. So don't complain about me making you do it once again. So I think it's just a gut thing. I think that you probably have a few rounds that you have to do. I know for me, I could still pick up a book that is published and go, oh, I wish I would have changed that. So sometimes you do have to let it go and trust somebody else's eyes. But again, that trusting someone else is sometimes somebody might tell you something that in your heart you don't think is true too. So you really have to trust your gut on that as well.
That's really important advice there. I have 2 more questions. First one, how do you create your stories? Do you have a specific way of coming up with characters or plot? Is there a process you go through, or some other kind of inspiration?
That's hard. There is no one right way.
Right.
You get an idea, you get a kernel of an idea, and you say, ooh, I want to write a book about a girl who lived in ancient England. Okay, what do I know about ancient England? I taught ancient English history. So what do I need to do? Where do I have to do? How much research do I have to do? Is it going to be accurate? Is it going to be powerful? Will people care about this person from ancient England? We've all watched like 9 zillion hours of Netflix. And we have watched movies, I know you have, because I have, that you watch the first 15, 20 minutes and it's like, this is awful. This is not good. I'm not enjoying this. I don't care about these characters. It's moving too slow. Oh my goodness. it's 20 minutes later and they've just moved down the road 3 feet. So, you know, you use the things that are available to us in video format on Netflix, and think about that as you're writing. Do you care about the character? When you read it, do you want to know what's going to happen next? Are you worried about the character? Are you happy for the character? Are you angry because something bad happened to the character? Then you know you've included what you need to have in there. So think of the very worst thing you've ever watched on Netflix, and don't do that.
Oh, that is terrific. I think that's really good. Okay, so I said one more question. I actually lied to you. It's really 2 more questions. But actually, no, because Sharon, I think you answered this. We had a question: how do you get readers to connect to your characters? And I think what I got from your answer is you have to care about them yourself, right? And then if you care about them passionately, or you have a strong connection to them, then maybe your readers will too. You know, I think that sounds like sound advice there. And then we have a question here. Who is a current YA author? I'm going to revise that and say author in whatever age group you wish, that you feel like aspiring authors really should read. And then part of this question is from the previously submitted questions. What's on your bedside table or wherever you keep the books that you're reading right now? So first for YA or children's, kids authors, and then what are you reading right now?
Well, I think all of us. I think I think that's of course a given. But yeah, I think that I even hesitate to give recommendations, because what's going to really move me is not necessarily really going to move you. And I go through phases where I do read nothing but middle grade, and then I read some YA, and then I might read some more adult things. And so I really can't tell you who you must, especially as a writer, because again, you might be wanting to write picture books, you might be wanting to write anything across the genre. The key is just to read as many as you can, and what does speak to your heart, what does make you connect the most.
Thank you. How about you, Margaret?
Well, I will recommend the book that I read kind of at the beginning of 2021, and I have kind of not quite grabbed people by the shoulder, because we're still in COVID times, but all but grabbed people by the shoulder and said, you have to read this book. I loved it so much. You have to read it. And that is the book that won the Prince Award this year, which is the top award for YA books. And it is called Everything Sad is Untrue by Daniel Nayeri. That's Nayeri. And it is actually an excellent book for writers to read, because there's a lot in it about story and how you tell stories and what stories are important. And it's somewhat based on his own life, somewhat autobiographical, in that he was an immigrant from Iran and went to Oklahoma, which, you know, is a bit of a culture shock. And it kind of all sorts of things go into this book. And it's kind of hard to describe, because he goes back to some Persian myths, and then you could almost say Oklahoma myths, and kind of how they are juxtaposed. And it's one of, I was a huge rereader of books as a kid, that if there was a book that I liked, I read it probably 10 or 12 times. As an adult, I've realized I'm not going to get to all the books that I really want to read. So I typically do not reread books, but this is a book that I finished it and I right away said, I've got to go back and reread that, because I want to see how things connect. So that's my plug for a great book.
Terrific. How about Margaret? What the other Margaret, what would you like to say?
So I've actually been on an adult book reading kick lately. So I feel bad that most of my recent books are adult books, but I am currently reading a book that I would have loved as a kid and I would recommend to children. It's called Perestroika in Paris.
Oh.
And I forget the name of the author. I say, so who have you read it? Am I the only?
It's the same author. It's Jane Smiley, right?
Yes, Jane Smiley. Yes.
Yeah.
This is actually the first book that I've read by her. It's just a really sweet story about a young racehorse who escapes from her stall and she wanders the streets of Paris. And it's told from the perspective of various animals and also this 8-year-old boy who has gained his entire education through reading because he lives in a house with his almost 100-year-old grandmother. And the animals kind of come into his life. It's a really sweet story. It's kind of what I needed right now in the midst of everything that's happening in the world. And yeah, I would have loved it as a kid.
Do you have any? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes.
One author is Jason Reynolds. Read anything he wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And another book that I think that is worth reading is called The Library Book.
Oh.
It's by Susan Orlean, Orlean, and it is a love letter to libraries. It starts off with a real fire that happened at a library in California. But she goes and she talks about the history of libraries and the library in Alexandria and the importance of libraries to community and how libraries were there in times of crisis where there was no place for people to go, but they all went to the library because it was a safe place. It is beautifully, beautifully and gloriously written, and I highly, highly recommend it. If you love books, you will love this book. It's called The Library Book, and it's even published in the old, they put it out without a dust jacket so that it feels like the old time library books like I used to get when I was a little girl. It's called The Library Book by Susan Orlean. Susan, call me. I think you're great.
That is terrific. I just want to put one last thing in there since the person asked for YA. I just finished Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko, and that also is a really interesting new book as well. So I have the unfortunate, sad duty to say that we don't have any more time to talk with you, at least on screen. But I'm so grateful to all of you for giving us the gift of your time and your wisdom and your spirit. And I'm going to hand it back over to Kim Tavares. Thank you all.
Absolutely. I mean, you all, such an amazing hour. It went by so quick. And I just love that, that there was a question about connecting with your audience and you guys connected with all of us tonight. And I think it's so important for everyone, but especially women, to hear that failure is okay. That first draft isn't going to be that. It's just that it's a first draft, and to keep going. So thank you so much for that, and just for sharing your craft and your passion with us tonight. It was just really amazing. And thank all of you for some great questions. So good. And we couldn't get to all of them. So I'm really sorry about that, but I hope that you all enjoyed it as much as I did and everyone else seemed to. You can keep up with all of our virtual events at our webinar site, which is alumlc.org/MiamiOH. And I want to just thank you all for joining us tonight, most especially, again, to all of you for your time tonight and for just being so candid and just open about everything. It just really appreciate it. And lastly, thank you to the Mickey and Walter Frank Family Charitable Fund. So on behalf of the Miami University Alumni Association, everybody have a great night. Love and honor.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.